Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, brothers and sisters all. My name is Virgil Wood, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this session of the Martin Luther King Summit. Today, we are privileged to have sharing with us Dr. Gregory Bailey. Dr. Bailey combines the disciplines of theology, law, and economics, and is a Martin Luther King scholar and is being published in this whole area of the beloved community and the beloved economy. We're all delighted, Dr. Bailey, that you will share with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, and it's good to see you, Dr. Wood, and I thank you for your great works to not only share about the beloved economy and the beloved community, but on really making the Jubilee concept known to the world. So I'm grateful to you.
Thank you.
Indebted to you. Dr. Wood, are you ready for me to go into the session on the beloved community?
Yes, Dr. Bailey, if you would take at least 30 minutes or so and lay out, your premise and so forth, and then we can all discuss and question and whatever. We'll have a dialogue.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I will be doing so. The beloved community grows out of the concept of agape love, unconditional love for one another. The community also comes from a Greek word called oikos, or is known as household, the household of God. And I contend that the beloved economy is an integral part of the beloved community, because the word for economy is two words that come from the Greek. One is oikos for household, and the other is the nami, which stands for law. So it states the God's household laws is where we get the concept of the beloved community. And one is stating that if you have a beloved economy, you have to follow God's law for the economy. So I just want to give that overview before I start giving a lecture on how do we overcome chaos and create community for our beloved economy. A beloved economy allows the world to overcome its current chaos. It provides a path to a beloved community. It permits the world to examine the faults in capitalism. The faults are like earthquakes that occasionally occur, but shake up not only our infrastructure, yet also our way of life, and can take life. As we emerge from the Great Recession, we realize the world has more inequality in wealth and income than ever before. However, we must also realize and be thankful that Martin Luther King Jr. applied his great mind to grapple with the mammoth problems of the 21st century of inequality, inhumanity, and a lack of dignity. A beloved economy incorporates some of the principles of binary economics to enhance its application to a broader audience. If there's going to be the reconciliation between human beings sought in King's beloved economy, one must examine how he strove for a beloved economy for all God's children and how to implement it. Martin Luther King Jr. knew the world was coming closer and closer together and needed to work together to become a beloved community. He understood the reality that technology continues to make each person in the world a neighbor. All inhabitants, he said, of the globe are now neighbors. The worldwide neighborhood has been largely, as a result, brought closer by modern scientific and technological revolutions. 50 years ago, There weren't personal computers in most homes, cables, fiber optics, or satellite communication. The fax machine, the internet, Twitter, Skype, or many of the other devices that bring us closer and in constant contacts that we have today. Nonetheless, as close as individuals can be throughout the world, it appears that our capacity to love one another has not kept up with the lightning pace to connect to one another throughout the world in the digital age. Our moral capacity to care for the well-being of each inhabitant of the world has failed to grow with equal speed to the modern scientific and technological revolutions. Have we considered why the world drifted so far from the beloved community of Martin Luther King's vision? We have complex and troubling issues far and near. Indeed, a few years ago, we had an Ebola breakout in a village in Liberia, and it can bring that sickness to the United States as well, or even inside Texas. Moreover, the lack of jobs and opportunities in Egypt can spring a revolution throughout the Middle East and into Northern Africa. How tragic has been the rise of the Islamic State with its practice of genocide and its advertising footage of beheading of Westerners to the notion of a beloved global community. Nonetheless, terror findings have also been found in the United States, where young Black males and their mothers fear their every confrontation with the police, whom are sworn to protect and serve all. Just as fearful is the concept of cops being assassinated merely for being cops. In order to gain perspective of what has contributed to the deep-seated problems, one must examine the flaws of capitalism as we know it and find a solution that can be embraced by all, regardless of race, religion, gender, or nationality. King's vision contained minimum standards for life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness for every human being in the world. Let's look for it. The world is on pace to have more than 7.5 billion people walking the earth by 2020. Each person represents a unique path toward creating a beloved economy, a ray of hope for building a better world and potential beyond a human's ability to measure. Each person endowed by God has something to offer and deserves the full faith and credit into membership into an economy that recognizes their personhood and potential to contribute to making the world greater. They do not deserve a world that has discounted not only their well-being, but that seeks to exploit or underutilize their human potential. Ashford states the phenomena as the unutilized productive capacity of a human being. Individuals suffer throughout the world because of a lack of growth of productivity and because of the herding of capital by the elite 1%, according to Ashford's theory. Moreover, human beings should not be pitted against each other to undercut the legitimate wage necessary to maintain a quality life. This is true whether one dwells in the most remote villages in Africa or comes from the inhabitable hamlets of Indochina. The gates of distribution for the goods and services of a person should be unlocked so that one's talent can reach the marketplace for mass distributions. One can make a contribution whether one is a digger of diamonds, silver, or gold, or merely a farmer producing goods to be sold to the market. Just as we have the ability to communicate with a cell phone to each individual on the planet, we have the ability to embrace their participation in the beloved economy and build a better community. The global Great Recession created vast hardships throughout the world and exacerbated the anemic job growth and opportunities for vulnerable and impressionable youth around the world. Conflating the crisis was the limited freedom of expression in many countries. Central to fostering a beloved community, as envisioned by Martin Luther King Jr., is the right to protest. King agreed with the former President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, who observed, "Those who make nonviolent revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." Many have noted that the Arab Springs arose out of the chaos of deteriorating economic conditions. Youth unemployment in countries like Egypt, Syria, Tunisia, and Yemen will rise in the near future as a consequence of the current economic and social deadlock they are facing. Worse, if the new governments fail to find adequate solutions, this may be a source of instability and a breakdown of the democratic process in the region. The prediction by Ahmed Dream came to light. There were uprisings in all of these Middle Eastern, Northern African nations since Dream's writing in 2012. There have been too many young people around the world living without the dignity of a job. Further, they were brutally repressed when seeking to redress their living conditions. Individuals throughout the diaspora merely seeking to protest their perceived flaws in the capitalistic system. They have been systematically denied full citizenship in the beloved community on earth. King warned the failure to embrace change would lead to chaos in his last book. Chaos has been identified with the starvation for food found around the world. Some individuals are starving because of decline of available habitable land for harvest and grazing due to climate change. Some are starving as a result of years of unresolved conflicts in Africa. Food insecurity exists in the United States as well. With regard to structural hunger in Utica, New York, for example, 1/4 of its 60,000 plus residents live under the poverty line. The number of students in its school districts who qualify for subsidized meals is so overwhelming that a free lunch is provided to all pupils in the district. Halfway through the Great Recession, a local publication in central New York offered the following picture. In the large area of central New York where Utica is located, 8% of seniors and 41% of children are food insecure. Food insecurity exists in one of the wealthiest states in the United States. Starvation reaps havoc on the human body. It is a repetitive deprivation and violence to human organs. Malnutrition causes the body to malfunction mentally and organs to begin to shut down. It is chaotic violence to the body. King credited this nation and the world with having the insights to uproot poverty. However, he was too optimistic when he stated the following. We have come a long way in our understanding of human motivation and of the blind operation of our economic system. Now we would rather widely acknowledge the dislocation of market operation of our economy and the prevalence of discrimination thrust people into idleness and bind them in constant or frequent unemployment against their will. The poor are less often dismissed from our conscience today by branding them as despised and incompetent. We now also know that no matter how dynamically the economy develops and expands, it does not eliminate all poverty. The nation has moved away from King's hope for a guaranteed annual income for each individual, and now seeks in some states to test each welfare recipient for the recent use of drugs, but does not provide adequate treatment resources for them if they do suffer from addiction. People abuse drugs to release them from some type of pressure or to overcome some type of problem. Denying them the basic maintenance of life does not solve the underlying problem, especially if the problem is depression or being disadvantaged or lacking a meaningful education or a job that allows one to maintain a quality life. Indeed, blind reliance on the fruits of capitalism ignores the unhealthiness of those who are unable to attain its fruits. Capitalism has defeated its strongest foe, which was communism, since the death of Martin Luther King Jr. King was not an ally of communism, but a harsh critic of its means to an end. He also saw fault in capitalism. Capitalism forgets that life is social, and the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. It is found in the higher synthesis that combines the truth of both. Now, when I say the question, the whole society, it means ultimately coming to see the problems of racism, the problems of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. These are the triple evils that are interrelated, stated King in 1967. Soviet Union was very powerful in King's day, but no longer exists today. China claims to be a communist nation, but possesses the second strongest economy in the world and practices free market principles around the world. Despite capitalism having record markets in the United States, where the Dow Jones recently eclipsed the 25,000 mark for the first time, unemployment remains too high in certain islands of poverty where our youth dwell and live in a state of hopelessness. Capitalism offers no excuse for its meager contribution to the beloved community. It is chaos when a man of Eric Garner's stature is killed for merely selling loose cigarettes in Staten Island. Capitalism should offer him better goods and services that are legal to make a living off of them than selling loose cigarettes. It is not merely the bad public policy of policing the distribution of untaxed cigarettes in Staten Island of New York City. Neither the economy nor the community was beloved that Eric Garner dwelled in. It is approximately 8 miles from the Federal Reserve of New York and Staten Island, where he died. Nevertheless, it was at least one ocean from policies of the Reserve that benefit people like him who it ignores. Capitalism failed him, as well as the Federal Reserve, which has a mandate to maintain maximum employment, that failed him. Binary economics also demands more of capitalism and the Federal Reserve. It asks a fundamental question: how can the unfree market economies ever expect their population to purchase the incremental output of capital unless the market for capital acquisitions are effectively open to everyone? Asked Ashford in 1999. Binary economics allows capital access to everyone in the United States without requiring the redistribution of income and wealth. It merely allows everyone to participate in the wealth generation of capital. Furthermore, it addresses the ineffective distribution of capital and the unutilized productivity capacity of human beings. A second implication is that with the modest reform of the existing markets for capital acquisition in an undercapacity producing economy, substantial growth and more broadly shared wealth can be achieved without the involuntary redistribution of income or capital. In other words, to address the problem of poverty and the needs of the economically disadvantaged, which has defied conventional solutions based on left-wing, right-wing, and centrist economic and political theory, God's way is easy. It merely requires an opening of capital acquisition system so that all people, not only the well-capitalized and a very few others, can participate individually in the production of God's bounty, not only as laborers. Most radical adjustments society has to make, according to Ashford, is to expand who may own capital in our self-defined definitions of owners, and thereafter providing the means for one to own it. Binary economics, introduced by Robert Ashford and Rodney Shakespeare, provides the economic analysis of the faults with capitalism as we know it. Capitalism thrives on not only the economic production, but human beings, but also on non-human factors, such as land, oil, minerals, animal production, as well as machines and computer products. However, most human beings are making a living from the production of their human output. Ashford and Shakespeare advocate for all Americans having access to capital capacity of America rather than a privileged few. They advocate for the Federal Reserve to allow each American to set up a capital account to acquire equity in the economy and to pay for the stocks with future returns from the growth of it in the private sector. This would allow for greater participation in the economy and would end economic inequality, according to Ashford and Shakespeare. Their concept is viable for a beloved economy because it deals with access to capital, which was one of the fundamental demands of the March on Washington advocated by Martin Luther King, Jr. Ashford and Shakespeare foresee the elimination of poverty through universal participation in capitalism. Moreover, Ashford believes that it is fully consistent with his Christian principles. Identifying King's beloved economy. King provides cogent examples of the beloved community, which is based on Jesus Christ, paying the ultimate price for the redemption of the world. King's vision contained 4 supporting beams to the King's concept of the beloved community. Furthermore, the concept of community to Martin Luther King had 4 foundational corners, and Baldwin captures the core principles of the beloved community very well. One is the impartiality of God in creating and dealing with human beings. 2, a sacramentalistic idea of the cosmos as echoed by the psalmist. The earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof belongs to him, the world and they that dwell therein. 3, a belief in the dignity and worth of a person as such. And 4, solidaristic view of society in the world, which holds that each person is distinct ontological entity who finds growth, fulfillment, and purpose through personal and social relationship based on the agape love ethic. And I can see where King's concept that we are all tied together through a single garment of destiny comes right out in this definition. This final principle is best characterized in King's use of the metaphor of the great world house or the worldwide neighborhood, world community, which suggests a totally integrated human family, unconcerned with human difference. The firm conviction of the invisible African American church during slavery used the notion of the impartiality of God to anchor a faith that it allowed it to distinguish the acts of the white Christians from the gospel and sacred word of God. David Walker's warning to the white church that God is not marked nor a respecter of race provides evidence to this hallmark, not only to King's faith, but to the Black community. The earth is the fullness thereof has been echoed not only from the Psalms, but is central to the preaching of the African American church that heard the echoes of a long line of dynamic sermons. Therefore, the wealth generated from the land belongs not only to its tangible landowners, but also to the citizens of the world in perpetuity. King's vision of a beloved community recognized the humanity and unique gift of each person from the Creator. King frowned upon public policy that was indifferent to the plight of human beings. In fact, King responded to the short-sighted government policies of paying people not to farm their land and former farmers without jobs with the launch of the Planning for the Poor People's March on Washington. The Poor People's Campaign was launched in response to the triple evils of racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. Resources have been diverted from the Great Society to the war in Vietnam. Senator Robert Kennedy suggested this idea to Martin Luther King through Mary Wright Edelman, who was close to both men. However, Chase dug up the historical fact that Robert Kennedy and Mary Wright Edelman had the conversation when she worked for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and included a momentous quote by her. He, King, was real down that day when I walked in, sitting in his office, and he was like everybody at that time. Kennedy and me and all of us concerned about the poor and what was happening to civil rights in the country turned away from it, about what we were going to do next. And I told that Bobby Kennedy said he ought to bring the poor people to Washington. And as simply as Bobby had said it, King instinctively felt that that was the right time and treated me as if I was an emissary of grace here, or something that brought him some sight. Out of that, the Poor People's Campaign was born. To give a little background, Robert Kennedy spoke to Mary Wright Edelman after doing his tour of Appalachia and doing a tour of Mississippi. But Martin Luther King had on April 4th, 1967, given the great speech at Riverside Church in New York against the Vietnam War and had been receiving a lot of negative press at the time. So I feel that that needs to be something that's emphasized of why the announcement by Mary Wright Edelman was so well received. It gave Dr. King new energy. The historic relevance of Senator Robert King making the recommendation to Martin Luther King appeared to be lost on the historians who appeared to misunderstand the revelation of an emissary of grace. Edelman is telling him that the recommendation was received similar to an angelic message from God. Moreover, Robert Kennedy, who traveled the Appalachian Trail with Edelman, as well as walked the dirt floors through the shotgun houses of Mississippi, had credibility speaking about the needs of poor people in the United States. He needed the people to dramatize the need for legislation to be enacted to overcome poverty. King understood that he must organize poor people and bring them to Washington to focus the nation's attention to the plight of poor people, just as he had organized people in Selma, Alabama, attempting to vote when he went to march in Montgomery. Andrew Young commented that Mary Wright Edelman was too generous to Bobby Kennedy in giving him all the credit. He stated she deserved credit as well. And I asked Ambassador Young, yes, so it was like a perpetual cycle of a war. In fact, Mary Wright Edelman reports that Robert Kennedy talked to Dr. King or sent word to Dr. King about initiating the Poor People's March on Washington. He didn't send her, she did it, and she shouldn't give him the credit. And I said, okay. She came not because of Robert Kennedy, because, well, she brought 4 black men with her who were between the age of 40 and 60. And none of them had ever had a job because government policies in the 50s began to subsidize farmers, and farmers could make money without growing food or fiber. In fact, it was part of price stabilization of agriculture, but it left the sharecroppers out completely. In fact, to put sharecroppers off the land. Well, the Mississippi farmers liked that because they were trying to drive the sharecroppers off their land and into the cities. That was a racist decision because they knew if the sharecroppers stayed there, they would outnumber the whites and you would have black people taking over policies in Mississippi. So they really, I don't think the liberal Congress that was stabilizing price understood the implication of unemployment that were being created by government policy. Reverend Young attributed the launching of the Poor People's Campaign to Marion Wright Edelman's foresight in demonstrating the harm in government policies. Bad public policies that perpetuate racism and disenfranchised is an obstacle to the beloved community. In the last speech of the board of SCLC, King gave a grave warning regarding power. He emphasized how important it is to the humanity to get the concept of power right. King foresaw how destructive seeking power without a moral basis could be. He saw the black community as confused over the concept of power that was being advocated by Stokely Carmichael and a few other leaders who freely echoed the word black power. They understood very well the essence of hard power as described by Nye. Hard power can be military or Machiavellian examples of power, where people are intimidated to follow the leader. Nye gives the example of hard power that demonstrates the use of fear. Police power, financial power, and the ability to hire and fire are examples of tangible hard power that can be used to get others to change their position, or they can try to change their positions. We know that our current president uses hard power all the time, but I don't think he's persuading many. In contrast, soft power makes a person do what you want them to do by persuading them to do it voluntarily. Soft power rests on the ability to shape the preferences of others to want what you want. This can work even in moments of conflict. King wanted Black America to choose love power in order to have an inclusive community rather than a separate movement. Now, we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And this is what we must see as we move on. Now, what has happened is that we've had it wrong and mixed up in our country. And this has led to the Negro American in the past to seek their goals through love and moral suasion, devoid of power. And white Americans to seek their goals through power, devoid of love and consciousness. It is leading a few extremists today to advocate for Negroes the same destructive and conscientious power that has justly upheld in whites. It is precisely that collision of immoral power with powerless morality which substitutes the major crisis of our times. King did not care if he was the only African American that was against violence. He was determined to be nonviolent. Furthermore, power can be reckless. He believed that it relied too heavily on military power and not enough on moral power. Furthermore, he saw the nation's attitude for war and peace being confusing for the Negro American community. Some in the community wanted to emulate one of the worst attributes of white America, and that is a tendency to answer challenges with violence rather than constructive engagement. King's recommended changes in the power paradigm where elitists will seek to do the public good with love and justice and for all humanity rather than the pursuit of power for the privileged few. Furthermore, he cautioned the African American community from blindly accepting the societal definition of power. Power is guided by love and justice, according to King. King had high hopes for the Poor People March on Washington. He saw it as a showdown for nonviolence. King sought to prevent further riots. He wanted to present an alternative to the youth that favored violence. He sought to demonstrate that through persuasion and economic boycott, the civil rights movement could achieve victory for the poor and oppressed. Furthermore, he sought to unify the nation. King shared his vision of ending violence in the inner city for the summer of 1968. I hope instead that what comes out of these nonviolent demonstrations will be an economic bill of rights for the disadvantaged to the tune of $10 to $12 billion. I hope a specific amount of drugs is set forth and programs emerge, creating 500,000 jobs to deal with the hardcore unemployed and some programs to supplement the income of those now earning below the poverty level. King's hoped to prevent further riots in 1968 when he wrote The Showdown on Violence. Sadly, this article was published 2 weeks after his death. King foresaw a right-wing takeover if the economic inequality continued. King also wanted to welcome whites, and in particular poor whites, back into the movement. A comprehensive review of King's writings, speeches, and sermons will fail to identify any biblical reference to the concept of Jubilee. However, I believe that Dr. Wood can give us some insights on Jubilee and where he believes that Dr. King would have gone with the concept of Jubilee. And I believe that I'm over my time, so I'm going to just at this point pause and let Dr. Wood take over. And I thank you very much for your time.
Dr. Bailey, that was extraordinary. I'm just so delighted and encouraged. So often people have no basis for believing that the dream is not a pipe dream. And I think that more the kind of scholarship that you're giving us will help us to understand why we must not throw in the towel, that we've got to pick up where King left off, take what he gave us. With respect to the issue of the timing of our action that you closed about, if Martin had been conscious of the Jubilee paradigm, I don't think he was. I asked Coretta the question in all their years together, if she had ever heard him explicate the Jubilee model. And she said she had never even heard him use the term Jubilee. I thought that was very interesting. My own sense is that the civil rights movement, not knowing that we were on a Jubilee agenda. In fact, King's first sermon as pastor of Dexter was Luke 4. Scripture was a Jubilee scripture.
Yes.
So that as we pursued the different campaigns in the movement, we might have staged the timing a little more differently. You know, if we had, my sociology professor at Virginia Union, Dr. H.J. McGuinn, in Sociology 401 said that society has something that you would call the compliance ceiling. Society has the ability to incorporate only so much change at one time. And if you overload the compliance ceiling, nothing gets done. And I think so much of has happened since King is that we've overloaded the compliance ceiling. We've pushed the poor aside and the issues that King cared about. And that means that maybe part of his legacy to us is to figure out what did we not get right. In fact, in 1966, it is well documented that he wanted to take a sabbatical from the movement, a year off, which I wish he had done. He deserved it. He had already brought the nation as far as it would going to go for the next 10 years. In fact, when Nixon finally ended the Vietnam War, it was King's plan that he had laid out before his death. And so I suspect our other participants will want to get in now, Dr. Bailey, and pursue with you further your wisdom on these matters.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Bailey. It's Ralph Hall here at Virginia Tech. I found your remarks to be really, really interesting, and you clearly have mastered the theory of binary economics, as Robert Ashford has articulated it. And I sort of wanted to add just a comment, perhaps maybe it will turn into a question. But the notion of employment, my work with Robert has allowed me to think about that in a couple of different ways. There's the employment that you as a laborer are willing to do for the reward that you would get. But there's also the employment that you are willing to let your capital do for you. And I think those two meanings of employment for your labor and the employment of your capital, I think is a very powerful way to help think about how we could move on the implementation of ideas related to binary economics. And so, I think you mentioned that one of the overarching goals of the Federal Reserve is full employment.
Yes.
What I'm thinking about is we need to broaden the notion of what employment really means. And I just wanted to sort of share that thought and hear your sort of whether you agree with that or what does it stimulate in your mind?
Well, it certainly does stimulate, and basically you are stating that there's really a dual use to employment. You can be employed either through your, I guess, your human productive capacity for your services or what you create, but also you can also be employed by having capital that is working for you. So I think that's a great way of explaining how one can participate in the economy. Especially you think of those who are disabled, and rather than think of them as being unemployed, they may not be employed for their labor and for their services, but they can be employed for what their capital can create. So if they had capital working for them, that would be something I feel would be ideal.
Also, Lou Kelso finally talked about the full employment of all resources as a way to think about the total picture. Ralph, did you have more you wanted to raise there?
I guess really a question about how would Dr. Bailey advance sort of binary economics. I was wondering if he has any thoughts in terms of a strategy here, given the sort of larger context of the beloved community. How if you were responsible for this, what would you do?
Well, I think that right now we're speaking to the choir in the sense that we know what the Federal Reserve mandate is, but most people do not know it. I think that one of the things that we have to do is to educate people that the Federal Reserve mandate is not just to make sure that it monitors inflation, but to make sure that we do have full employment. And that second part of their mandate, I don't believe has ever been one of their goals. Or if it is, they certainly fail it. And we could look at youth unemployment as an example of that. And if we could make that a mandate that they actually do something, I guess, that would go a long way toward improving things in our inner cities and even in our rural areas where we have youth unemployment being so high. One of the things I touched on was the fact that we have, and when I wrote this paper, it was before you had the opioid epidemic as well known as it is today. But the young people who are in either New Hampshire or in the Appalachian areas that are suffering from high unemployment, a state of hopelessness, that should be part of the target of the Fed Reserve to try to get them meaningful jobs, as well as to find some way of curing their addiction. So I feel that it's related. And one of the things that Dr. King emphasized, and I've had the privilege of studying at the Woodruff Library here at the Atlanta University Center, and read his writings. A lot of them are unpublished, but he spoke on and wrote about what would happen if we did not have full employment. He realized that we had a consumer-oriented economy, and he worried about our young people and the technological revolution that was occurring, and what would happen if they didn't have jobs. And this is what is actually occurring in West Virginia and in New Hampshire, and our young people have not responded well to it. And yet, this was something that Dr. King did realize more than 50 years ago.
If no one else has another question, I have several here. And if they do, please speak up, and we want to have your input. I've had privilege across the years of working with Dr. Bailey, and I'm just delighted that he's helping us here. Dr. Bailey, to pick up on your last comment.
Yes.
If we did not have a full employment economy, the labor unions are gathering at Memphis now, 2 days from the 50th anniversary of Martin's passing. You and I both have been involved in trying to help the labor unions understand that were they to press for worker ownership of the contract, of the waste management, all of that in Memphis, that we would be much further along. And I fear that the labor unions themselves, the leadership of the labor unions based on binary economics, has failed the laborers themselves. And they have pushed for inflationary policies that did not get long-term employment, nor did it get equity for the workers. And I'm wondering what you would respond if the folks at Memphis, I don't know who over there now really cares about this anymore. I'm so disheartened by how cavalier we have become about what King has left behind. But suppose they did decide, what we will do even now is to press for a worker ownership model and get that contract from from that city and the surrounding municipalities. What would the outcome likely be, say, in 7 to 10 years, in your judgment?
Okay. Well, worker-owned companies are some of the, I guess, more successful companies in our country. One of the companies that comes to mind is Publix Food Chain. And I go there on a regular basis and get a chance to talk to their employees, and they take great pride in owning some of that company. So there are real examples of publicly owned companies. And this is something that was championed by Louis Kelso and Dr. Wood. I know that you had tried to bring Louis Kelso and Martin Luther King together before Dr. King died.
Yes.
And there's, I guess, legislation that makes it possible to have employee stock ownership plans. However, it's not being pushed enough and not being emphasized enough. But this is another way that you can have a beloved economy. In addition to that, what we talked about with the Fed Reserve, I guess making it easy for people to obtain capital. I feel that that would be one of the ways that they can do that for the employees, is to help them own capital in their business. Maybe we've just seen them give basically no interest loans to the banks for the last, I guess, 8 to 9 years. They finally are now beginning to give them interest. But if this was to be done for the average person, we could have them participate in capital. And it reminds me of a statement that Ambassador Young made when he talked about capitalism and democracy. He said that though we have a capitalistic system, we do not have capital in each person's hands. And it reminded him that you can't have a democracy without people having the right to vote. You cannot have a true capitalistic system when only a privileged few have the capital. So I believe that that's a very important notion, that in a beloved economy, everybody ought to be able to participate in it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Is there any other now, before we close out here? Tomorrow, Dr. Norman Kerwin will be on with us.
Oh, okay.
And we will be celebrating tomorrow as Louis Kelso Day, April 3rd. Kelso, I started working with Lou Kelso in 1964 and worked with him right until his passing in 1991. And you're right, I did try to bring Kelso and King together. I've got Kelso to Atlanta. King was not able to be present for us. There's some crisis that called him away. But it's up to us now to see the genius of how King's beloved community is the why, and Kelso's binary economics is the how.
Yes.
And tomorrow, Dr. Kerwin, I'm sure, will talk about the proposal for a capital Homestead Act along the lines of Lincoln's Land Homestead Act.
Excellent, excellent. What time tomorrow will Dr. Kirkland be on?
He will be on in the 1 o'clock hour.
Okay.
I think it's 2 o'clock your time, I believe.
Okay, well, thank you.
With us at that time.
I should be able to.
Dr. Wood, we
Yes.
have one. I believe we have one question coming in
Yes.
from an attendee. I believe he can speak, so I'll let him go.
Excellent.
Hello, this is Ryan Hulbert calling from Idaho.
How are you?
Great. And where are you located, sir?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, sir.
Okay, I thought you had mentioned that. Great. I am an associate part of the movement, and I've been attempting to come up with a pledge that I'm hoping might motivate people to become an associate in the movement in general. And with Dr. Wood's permission, I'd like to float that here and get Dr. Bailey's thoughts on it.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Okay. It has about 5 brief statements.
Okay.
And I'm trying to incorporate the Jubilee theme, which I'm enamored with and trying to better understand, plus overcoming poverty and so forth. But anyway, here's a stab at it. I believe that all people, including myself, are of great worth.
Amen.
I believe that all people are part of the same family of the human race.
Yes.
Strongly holding these beliefs, I pledge to improve myself and to support people in their physical, educational, employment, and emotional needs.
Amen.
I further pledge myself to honor the Creator of the world by using one day in a week for devotion and renewal. I believe that these actions will result in reducing poverty and increasing unity and love in a beloved community. And that's the end of it.
I like your pledge. I'd like to see it in writing, but I liked what I heard. Okay. Ryan, I like the pledge.
Well, thank you. I speculate that if we had some of these notions, including return to the Sabbath day, that we'd have a lot of good things happening in the country.
Yes. Yes.
Well, the actually, Sabbath is Jubilee, one day, 1 week at a time.
Yes.
And then it's 7 times 7 is the sabbatical, which
Yes.
universities give their favorite professors.
Yes.
And then, of course, seven sabbaticals plus 1 year gives you the Jubilee. So we've had 7 cycles of 7 years since King, and then we're now in that last year, and we're at the point of being able to reset the dream. And this pledge, Ryan, I think is so very helpful, and it's part of the way we are growing this movement. We're letting it emerge. We're not trying to pontificate or manipulate anything. We're just trying to let the spirit of this whole thing guide and direct where we're trying to go. Dr. Bailey, if you have does anyone else have a question or comment for Dr. Bailey before we have his final comment? Dr. Bailey, we want to say thank you again, and any final comment you have for us, we'd be delighted to hear it now.
I will be posting some pictures of the community that Martin Luther King was raised in, and is part of what was my dissertation. But part of my thesis is that Dr. King grew up in a beloved community and had a microcosm of a beloved economy in that community. I want to just share with you the home that he was raised in, some of the great churches that were in his community, one insurance company called Atlanta Life that they're building, and lastly, I believe the SCLC building, which was owned by the Mason Temples. And John Wesley Dobbs played an important part in the upbringing of Martin Luther King, but also in organizing the community. So you can see what was put together by descendants of slaves in that community that became known as King's beloved community. And I thank you, Dr. Wood, for all your work, and much more success to you.
I thank you too. God bless you.
Thank you. Okay. Have a great